They said first class was full. The gate agent didn't look up when he said it, just tapped a few keys, frowned at the monitor, and slid the boarding pass back across the counter. Sorry, sir. Economy only. The man on the other side of the counter didn't argue. He didn't even sigh. He just nodded once, took the pass, and stepped aside for the next passenger. His shoulders were squared, posture controlled, every movement neat as if measured against a rulebook only he could see. Most people in line didn't notice him. Just another middle-aged traveler in worn boots and a plain jacket, carrying a scuffed leather bag that had seen more flight hours than most commercial crews. But the woman behind him caught the flicker in his eyes when he glanced at the first-class sign. Not disappointment, exactly. Something closer to calculation. By the time boarding was called, he was seated in 21C, an aisle halfway down the cabin, the kind of seat that made long legs feel trapped. He folded himself into it anyway, stowed his bag, and opened a paperback whose corners were softened from repeated reads. Nothing about him shouted importance. But 10 minutes after takeoff, people were staring at him anyway. It started with the turbulence. Not the gentle bumps that make drinks ripple, but the kind that rattles overhead bins and makes strangers grip armrests in unison. Flight attendants braced themselves against the galley, faces tight with the kind of professional calm that tells you they're worried, too. Somewhere in the cockpit, a warning chime sounded sharp enough to cut through steel. Row 21 felt it. The man closed his book and sat upright, his head tilting ever so slightly like he was listening for something the others couldn't hear. When the jet lurched again, his hands tightened on the armrests, not in fear, but as though testing the vibrations the way a mechanic listens to an engine. The woman across the aisle whispered, "Oh my God." The overhead lights flickered once. Then came the announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing some unexpected turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened," the voice trailed into static. Not reassuring. Not confident. A baby started crying 2 rows back. Someone cursed under their breath. The man in 21C didn't move. His eyes had shifted upward, calculating angles, listening to the pitch of the engines like he was measuring heartbeat rhythms against a metronome. Then the first-class curtain snapped open. A flight attendant, pale but composed, walked briskly down the aisle toward the back. But before she reached row 21, another jolt hit. The plane dipped hard to the right, oxygen masks tumbled from their housings, and gasps filled the cabin like a wave. "Sir." The attendant caught herself on his seat back. Her eyes darted to his face, recognition flashing there for half a second. "You're." He stood. Calm. Deliberate. One practiced motion released his seatbelt, and another steadied her. His voice was low, controlled. "Cockpit?" She hesitated, torn between protocol and desperation. Then she nodded. Half the cabin watched him stride forward, ducking past the dangling masks, moving with the kind of balance you only see in people trained to move through chaos. Murmurs followed in his wake. Who was he? Why was the crew letting him through? At the cockpit door, the purser keyed in a code and looked back at him with eyes that said, "This is insane." But the door opened anyway. And that's when the passengers of Flight 417 learned that the man relegated to row 21C, denied a seat in first class, wasn't just another traveler. He was something else entirely. Inside the cockpit, alarms painted the air with shrill urgency. One pilot's hands gripped the yoke white-knuckled, the other stabbed at controls that refused to respond. Altitude dropped. Speed wavered. Warning lights bled red across every instrument panel. Stabilizers jammed, the captain barked. No response on manual trim, the first officer shot back, sweat streaking his temple. Then they both froze. Because the man in the doorway didn't hesitate. He stepped in, scanned the panels once, and reached for a switch the way a surgeon goes for a scalpel. "Who the hell are you?" the captain demanded. "Someone who's landed worse than this," he replied evenly, flipping the circuit breaker with a sharp snap. The alarm stuttered, recalibrated. For the first time in 3 minutes, the aircraft stopped fighting itself. The first officer blinked. That shouldn't have. "Emergency bypass," the man explained without looking at him. "Your trim's not jammed. It's feedback from a failed actuator. Kill the circuit, isolate hydraulics, she'll fly manual." The captain's eyes widened. That wasn't textbook knowledge. That was field experience. The man slid into the jump seat, clipped the harness, and his hands found the backup controls like they'd been waiting for him. "You've still got lift on the port wing. Hold her steady while I balance thrust." And then, impossibly, the violent shuddering steadied. Back in the cabin, passengers felt the plane level out. Fear softened into disbelief. The woman who'd noticed him at the gate whispered, "He's flying it. That guy from row 21. The baby stopped crying. The murmurs grew louder. Relief threaded through fear, but curiosity bloomed with it. Because in that moment, everyone wanted to know, who is he? Not just a pilot. Not just a passenger. Something more. In the cockpit, the captain was asking the same question. "You military?" The man didn't answer immediately. His focus was on the horizon line, steadying the bird against invisible fists of wind. Only after a long beat did he speak. "Was." "Branch?" the first officer pressed. "SEALs. Special Operations. Flew covert insertion aircraft." The captain exhaled sharply. Every word clicked into place. The posture, the calm under pressure, the way he knew systems inside out. This wasn't luck. This was muscle memory carved from missions that never made the news. "What's your name?" The man adjusted thrust, eyes fixed on the instruments. "Call me Riker." And with that, the story of Flight 417 changed forever. Behind them, in the cabin, phones were already recording. Faces pressed to the aisle, whispers rippled like current through water. The man denied a first-class seat was in the cockpit, saving the flight. And what he was about to do next would leave everyone stunned. The captain's hands trembled slightly on the yoke, but not from fear, from the sudden realization that control had returned. The aircraft responded to every minor correction, no longer bucking against their commands. "You've done this before," the first officer muttered, half awed, half disbelieving. Riker didn't smile. His jaw was set, his gaze unwavering on the horizon line through the cockpit glass. Outside, clouds churned in turbulent layers, streaks of lightning flashing far below. "Not like this," he admitted. "But I've pulled birds out of worse dives when lives were on the line." The captain looked at him again, really looked this time. The close-cropped hair flecked with gray, the steady hands, the quiet authority that didn't demand respect but commanded it all the same. It hit him, this man wasn't some retired weekend pilot. This was a professional forged in crises most civilians couldn't imagine. "Why weren't you in first class?" the captain asked, a strange edge in his voice. Riker flicked a glance sideways, the barest hint of a shrug. Didn't need it. No one spoke after that. The storm outside provided its own soundtrack, gusts battering metal, the constant hiss of wind, the occasional jolt that reminded them of gravity's pull. Then, through the static of the comms, came another problem. Flight 417, this is air traffic control. You've deviated altitude. Respond. The captain grabbed the radio. Control, this is 417, experiencing critical systems failure, stabilizer actuator loss. Attempting to regain full manual. Static crackled. 417, say again. We read altitude loss of 3,000 feet in 60 seconds. Confirm? Riker leaned forward, toggled the frequency manually, and spoke in clipped precision. For 17, confirm actuator loss. Bypassing hydraulics. Aircraft stable. Request vectors to nearest field capable of heavy landing. There was a pause. Then the controller's voice returned, sharper, more alert. 417, identify speaker. Civilian advisor, Riker said smoothly. Former naval aviator. Call sign Riker. Prior SEAL insertion pilot, V-22 and C-130 qualified. I've got this aircraft under control. The silence on the other end was telling. Whoever manned that frequency now understood what kind of passenger had taken charge. Copy, Riker, the controller finally replied, the respect audible now. Stand by for emergency vectoring. The captain shot him another glance, disbelief still coloring his expression. But he didn't argue. For the first time since the alarm started, he allowed himself to breathe. Back in the cabin, whispers had swelled into open speculation. Word spread row by row, the man from 21C was flying the plane. Parents clutched their children tighter, elderly couples exchanged looks of prayerful relief, and business travelers craned their necks, trying to catch any glimpse of what was happening behind the reinforced cockpit door. The woman from the boarding line, her name was Claire, though few knew it, watched the door with unblinking focus. She remembered the way he had accepted his economy seat without complaint. Now she saw the irony. The man who could save them all had been the one deemed unworthy of first class. Another jolt shook the fuselage, drawing gasps, but the leveling came quicker this time. Passengers realized they were still aloft because of him. Anxiety shifted into a strange kind of awe. And then, just as hope took root, a new warning light flared across the cockpit panels. Fuel imbalance, the first officer muttered, eyes scanning gauges. Right tank dropping faster than left. Riker didn't flinch. Crossfeed malfunction. Shut it before it drains uneven. Wheel trim with thrust. The captain hesitated. That'll leave us short on approach. Riker's voice hardened, not unkind but absolute. Better short on fuel than unbalanced in a turn. Do it. The authority in his tone brooked no debate. The captain obeyed. Minutes stretched like hours. Every sound, every shudder of metal carried weight. But under Riker's hands, the aircraft held steady, coaxed through turbulence with surgical precision. His eyes darted between instruments and sky, each correction instinctive, each adjustment purposeful. And then, finally, a break in the clouds revealed the faint lights of a runway far below. The controller's voice returned. 417, you are cleared priority emergency approach, runway 27. Winds cross at 20 knots. Fire and rescue standing by. The captain exhaled. There it is. But Riker wasn't relaxing yet. His eyes narrowed at the glint of wet tarmac. Rain slicked. Crosswind on final. If you don't nail the flare, she'll skid. You're saying we might not stick the landing? The first officer asked. Riker finally looked at him, eyes steady. I'm saying we will stick it. Or none of us walk away. Silence swallowed the cockpit. In the cabin, passengers clutched armrests as the descent began. Oxygen masks still dangled overhead, a surreal reminder of how close they had come. But now eyes were bright, expectant. They wanted to believe. The purser's voice came over the intercom, steady despite the quiver beneath it. Ladies and gentlemen, remain seated with seatbelts fastened. We are on emergency approach. Please remain calm. Phones lifted into trembling hands. Some recorded whispered prayers, others filmed loved ones, as if capturing proof of existence mattered in the face of what might come. Claire didn't raise her phone. Her eyes stayed on the cockpit door, silently willing the stranger inside to finish what he had started. Inside, the runway loomed closer. The captain gripped the yoke, but Riker's voice guided him. Ease descent rate. Don't chase the glide, trust it. Left rudder, compensate for the crosswind. That's it. Hold your flare until I call it. The captain obeyed. Every command cut through tension like a lifeline. Now, flare. The nose lifted, the main wheels kissed wet asphalt, and for one suspended moment, no one breathed. Then the screech of rubber against runway filled the air, and the aircraft thundered down, decelerating under screaming brakes and deployed reversers. They didn't skid. They didn't veer. Against every odd, they stayed true down the center line. The cabin erupted, cheers, sobs, shouts of relief. Phones recorded triumphant chaos. Passengers hugged strangers, tears streaking faces that had been pale with dread minutes before. The captain sagged in his seat, sweat dripping, eyes wide in disbelief. We made it. Riker unstrapped smoothly, his voice calm as ever. You made it. I just gave you the tools. The captain turned toward him. You saved us. But Riker shook his head once. The bird saved herself. I just listened. Before anyone could say more, the purser burst into the cockpit, eyes wet with relief. They're all safe. They're chanting your name back there. Riker glanced at her, then at the closed cockpit door beyond. For the first time, a faint smile ghosted across his face. Funny, he murmured, they wouldn't let me in first class. The irony hung in the air like smoke. But this wasn't the end of Flight 417's story. Because as emergency vehicles swarmed the runway and passengers prepared to disembark, Riker's past, carefully hidden, deliberately quiet, was about to catch up with him. And that revelation would stun everyone even more than his cockpit move. The aircraft slowed to a rolling crawl, escorted by flashing emergency vehicles. Red and blue lights painted streaks across rain-slick windows, illuminating faces still tear-streaked with shock and relief. Inside, the cabin pulsed with nervous energy. Passengers couldn't stop glancing at the cockpit door, whispering, replaying the impossible fact, a man denied first class had saved them all. When the jet came to a stop, the captain unbuckled slowly, his body still trembling from adrenaline. He looked at Riker as though searching for words that didn't exist. I don't know how to thank you, he said finally, voice low. Riker shook his head, already unclipping the harness of the jump seat. Don't. Just remember, systems fail. People can't. The cockpit door opened, and a roar of applause surged from the cabin. Passengers rose despite instructions to remain seated. Phones aimed like spotlights, recording every second. The man who had entered the cockpit in silence now stepped out into chaos. Children clapped. Adults shouted gratitude. A businessman in a loosened tie shouted, "Hero," and others echoed it until the word pulsed through the cabin like thunder. Riker paused only long enough to sweep his gaze over them, faces of people alive because of choices he'd made in seconds. His expression didn't gloat, didn't soften. It simply carried the gravity of a man who had seen lives balanced on thinner margins before. Claire pushed forward from her row, her phone forgotten, tears brimming. You saved us," she whispered, almost reverent. He met her eyes briefly. There was something in his expression she didn't expect, weariness, as though the weight of her gratitude pressed heavier than the danger just past. "Glad you're safe," he said simply, stepping aside. But safety, it turned out, wasn't the end. Two uniformed men waited just outside the aircraft door when the jet bridge connected. Their posture wasn't that of airline staff, it was military, unmistakable. As passengers funneled out, murmuring excitement and relief, the men remained still, eyes locked on the cockpit hero. When he appeared, the taller one spoke. "Commander Riker?" The name hit the cabin like another jolt of turbulence. Gasps rippled. Claire's hand flew to her mouth. "Commander?" Riker's jaw tightened. "Not anymore," he said quietly. The second man's tone was sharper. "Orders, sir. You're requested for debrief. Now." The captain, still pale, stepped forward. "Wait, this man just saved over 200 lives. He deserves recognition, not..." But the taller officer cut him off. "Recognition isn't the issue. Clearance is. He was never here." The words were cold, final. Passengers exchanged bewildered looks. Phones kept rolling, but the officers' expressions made it clear that footage might not survive the night. Riker adjusted the strap of his weathered bag, the same one he had carried aboard like any traveler. "Understood," he said. No protest. No hesitation. Just acceptance, as if he'd always known this moment would come. Claire stepped forward, bold despite the tension. "People need to know what you did. They need to see." His eyes softened for the briefest moment. "What matters is you live to tell it," he said. Then, with a faint smile that carried both gratitude and resignation, "That's enough." The officers flanked him, guiding him down the jet bridge. Passengers pressed to the windows, straining for a glimpse, but the rain-streaked glass blurred everything into shadow. By the time most realized what had happened, he was gone. News spread anyway. Within hours, shaky cell phone footage hit social media, the comm man from row 21 stepping into the cockpit, the thunderous applause when he emerged, the murmurs of SEAL, commander, pilot. Clips went viral before official channels could suppress them. Headlines flared across the globe, "Mystery SEAL pilot saves commercial flight." Speculation exploded. Who was he? Why was his name classified? Why did officials whisk him away? Claire's interview sealed the legend. Her trembling voice, aired on morning shows, described how he had been denied first class, how he had walked forward without fear, how his hands had steadied not just the aircraft but everyone's hearts. "He wasn't loud, he wasn't arrogant," she said. "He just knew. And he saved us all." But beneath the celebration, questions burned hotter. Why would a man like that be hidden? Why deny him recognition? And what missions had carved that instinct into his bones? Official statements offered nothing. The airline praised unnamed support from a passenger. The military denied involvement. The men in uniform were never identified. And yet, the story lived. Not in reports, not in files, but in the voices of those who had been there. Every passenger carried it forward, their fear transformed into awe, their disbelief into testimony. The man they called Riker became more than a name. He became a ghost of resilience, a reminder that real heroes don't sit in first class, don't demand recognition, don't wait for applause. They act. Quietly. Decisively. And then they vanish, leaving only the echo of survival behind them. Claire kept replaying his last words to her, "What matters is you live to tell it." So she did. And as she spoke, as passengers shared, as millions watched shaky footage of Row 21's quiet stranger, a truth spread wider than any official could contain. Sometimes the greatest moves don't happen in luxury seats, but in the cockpit, when the world is seconds from disaster, and one man refuses to let it fall. The SEAL-denied first class had stunned them all. Not because he flew the plane, but because when everything failed, he proved that courage never does.